So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to introduce Maria and Zach, let them introduce themselves really. And then we'll start by thinking about like this great rich topic of inclusive pathways and the new world of work. So Maria, do you want to start just by explaining sort of where you are situated and what kind of work you're doing and have done?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. I'm just so delighted to be here. I was Pols graduate 2008 and absolutely loved my experience. I was quite devastated when I graduated, actually, because I wanted to stick around longer. So I am most recently coming from the governor's office in Maine. So you're all greeting each other with good morning, but it's afternoon here for me. And so I'm really excited to offer a look inside sort of policy decisions, particularly recently in light of ARPA funding and how states are trying to address workforce. Using some of that guidance from the Treasury Department. And so anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much, Mark and Ihan, for inviting me.
Great. Zach, do you want to say hello and explain sort of what you're up to, what part of the education world you're?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach Lam. I was a Pols graduate in 2018, so fairly recently. Before that, I was working at a nonprofit that worked with youth who were either dealing with homelessness or were coming out of the juvenile justice system. And I was helping them. We had a program that helped them finish their high school diploma and then enroll in a local community college. So I did that I was doing that work for about 7 years before Stanford. And then since I graduated, I've been here at City College of San Francisco. This is where I grew up in San Francisco. And so I wanted to come back and serve this community. So I'm here at CCSF as an administrator, overseeing some workforce development funds that we receive from the state, about $4 or $5 million a year. And I also happen to oversee our career services team, which does a lot of work connecting students to local businesses and employers. And then also our Office of Student Employment, which handles like on-campus student work. So that's I'm in the workforce development department here at a local community college.
Mm-hmm. Zach, why don't we stay with you for a minute? And can you, first of all, I think it might be beneficial that people hear community college and they might not realize how big an impact City College in San Francisco has, CCSF has. So like roughly how many students are you serving these days?
It kind of depends on how you count them, because we have a lot of students who maybe they just take 1 or 2 courses. About 70 to 80% of our students are working. So a lot of them aren't full-time enrolled. So probably in terms of like what we would call like FTEs, if people are familiar with that, like a full-time equivalent student, it's probably, I think, like 20,000. But the number of like individuals is probably maybe double that. And so it's a pretty large institution. It's the only community college that serves San Francisco. And so we have like 8 or 9 different campuses kind of around the city.
Great. And why don't we stay with you for a second, and just what seems promising where you're situated? What seems really promising when you think about creating these inclusive pathways for students at City College?
I think the big thing that is really positive is I think the need for these pathways is being recognized at the state level and higher up, right? So there's the funding that we receive when at the start of COVID, there was concerns about what's the state budget going to look like, right? And if that state budget is, we're not getting sales tax revenue and stuff like that. So if that is under pressure, are we going to lose money? Instead, the governor chose to kind of double down and actually increase what we were receiving specifically for workforce development. So I think that's really important that on a funding level, right, these needs are being recognized and it's not just talk. And then I think in general, there's a couple things that really excite me. The first is when we talk about the future of work, to me, it looks so much more human and humane than maybe the work of the past did. And I think that is really exciting and positive. And then I think we're getting better at teaching and training. And maybe we can talk more about how we're doing that later, but I do think that we're getting better at it. It's being done more efficiently. And I think the big question for us as like a large public institution is, are we kind of nimble enough to keep up with the pace of change, because it is so much more rapid than it has been in the past. But overall, I'm still pretty optimistic, but it is a challenge for us for sure.
Yeah. Maria, what about you? What do you see as like the bright spots, or what gives you hope in the policy work you've done and how you see it?
Yeah, a number of things actually that I'm really excited about. So one thing that I've become more aware of is that policymakers are really starting to think about catching kids early, middle school, high school, with career exploration opportunities, and really trying to plug kids into local communities of, these are the businesses in your area. Did you know that? And so this starting early is exciting. And then work-based learning. This is not a new concept, right? But policymakers are talking about it in a way that they haven't. And there is increasingly large amounts of funding and support. So in Maine, when the state drafted its economic development strategy, talent was the big piece of that. And we went around the state, we had more than 1,200 people offer public input. And for a state like Maine, that's a lot of people. And working with youth was like the big thing that people were excited about, is creating that pipeline. And, there's a lot of great research that talks about the importance of, within work-based learning, mentorship, using intermediary organizations, knowing that schools and workplaces can't necessarily work with kids to sort out all their issues, but a solid intermediary can play that role. And wraparound services, recognizing like, you're 16, your car breaks down, you can't get to your internship, now what? And so there's starting to become more funding to do those kinds of things. ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, created significant amount of money for states and workforce development. And so states are now better resourced to do some of these things. The caveat, though, is that under Treasury guidance, the programs that states are putting forth have to be in response to COVID, in that looking at the data on what populations were most impacted, right, by closures and shutdowns, and then what sort of resources can we give them. So although in Maine we had great visions for elementary, middle school career exploration programs being funded by ARPA, we've had to reposition and go, okay, we're gonna need to focus more of this money, this big money, on work-based learning for like 16, 17, 18-year-olds, given that the pandemic impacted workers in retail, food service, and that's where some of those kids in Maine were working. So just this morning, I was sort of thinking about what are the keys to successful work-based learning, and I just sort of made this up this morning, of the 3 C's, right? Connection. So students need to get connected to opportunities in their communities. Community is certainly key, right? Sort of within that place-based education, building relationships. And then creativity is really important for Maine. So for example, we have all these rural places where there's no real industry. And so thinking about, okay, how can we do things remotely? Can we get a point person from a big company down in southern Maine, in the sort of the larger area, to once a week show up at a co-working space in a rural area where kids can come and meet with that person and have, a several-hour work session with them and have that face-to-face interaction, and then the rest of the week doing stuff remotely. So yeah, connection, community, creativity. I think these are some of the things we're really thinking about in the state of Maine. And I've got some examples of really great work-based learning programs that I'll drop in the chat for you all to check out. But those are things I'm excited about.
Good. And speaking of the chat, just let me say to everyone that, you're welcome to also push questions into chat as you think of them, and we'll save the last 10, 15 minutes at least for, to start answering those questions. If something one of the speakers says, inspires a question or some curiosity in you. Let me just add, I love what you both said. And I think there's a nice thread already of I can hear of community and then connection too, I think. And I just want to take a minute to highlight some on the K-12 side, what I've seen, some of the promise I've seen. I feel a few things that really give me a lot of hope. And actually, this is not, I'm not being paid by the Stanford Alumni Association to say nice things about Stanford, but a bunch of them do connect to things that are really, strong points on campus, I think. Okay, so here goes. I think the deeper learning movement, it has been a big inspiration to me, and I think it offers a lot of promise in terms of thinking beyond everything having been broken down into atomistic, little learning objectives, helping students to see in their studies and in their school experiences to play the whole game at a junior level, as one of the practitioners says, to really learn to be instead of just learning about something, right? And then, so CTE work, certainly career technical education certainly is super aligned into that, right? Because you're seeing yourself as a practitioner over time in middle school, high school, right? Or at least potentially, I think. Connected to that, and I think there's a tension in here, but one of the other promising things I think is this very recent work on academic identity, how students develop their sense of who they are as a learner, right? And there's this, it's pretty invisible, except to this new field. Oftentimes these conversations that students are having with their parents, their peers, their grades, their homework, it's that conversation they're having invisibly in middle school, high school in particular, but also higher ed, that sort of says, I'm not a math person, or I really want, I do see myself as a creative, or whatever it is. And so that, starting to think about how we as individual educators, but also as systems, can foster these positive academic identities and really intervene in supportive ways, right? As they develop academic identity. On the CTE front, on K-12, I've seen a lot of really wonderful things. When I was doing some CTE work in Oakland a couple of years ago, we developed some programs that, the kids in Oakland we were working with were literally, on the doorstep of Silicon Valley in terms of geographic location, right? Spotify and so many other, some of these places were just a couple BART stops away, or a quick car ride away. But the school in the beginning there was no clear pathway from being a ninth grader in that high school to get into that industry, right? It wasn't obvious at all. And sort of compounding it was the idea that a lot of high school teachers were saying, these few kids over here are my STEM kids. And then sort of writing off in a way like the rest of the community as maybe not STEM kids, maybe not people who would end up at Apple or whatever. And I think the CTE work we did surfaced the fact that, actually these people you're saying aren't necessarily STEM kids are spending their time already outside of school building Minecraft servers and doing all this cool stuff. And they were really eager to have pathways opened up for them. And now we've got alumni who've worked at DoorDash and Cisco and lots of these companies and so on. So anyway, those are a few of the things that I'm excited about. wanted to switch gears though and come back to Maria and just ask, in policy, where, I mean, you've seen a lot of bright lights. You've pointed us at some really promising things, but what are the tensions like in your work that you have to straddle, or what are the pitfalls you have to route around?
Yeah, I think when I was a student at Stanford, I was really optimistic, and I thought, yes, policy is going to be made by, informed by best practices and research, and I'm going to have the opportunity to, share this information, and then people are going to make the right choices based off that. And the reality is that decision making happens in very different ways. Money is a big thing. And then also just priorities and attention, distraction. And so, for some of these things, you have to get the commissioner of different departments to agree to shape programs in ways that we know are really effective, but they may be way too busy to hear about it. They may have a different idea about what's sort of easy and doable for them. And so one of my frustrations was like, hey, we know that these things are really important. Why would we shortcut this stuff? Because we know kids aren't going to be as successful and it's going to be a waste of money. So I think that good intention and that sort of belief, like, at least on the state level, right? We know on the federal level, that's a whole nother can of worms. But on the state level, in a state like Maine, it's small enough. You have personal relationships with the people who are making decisions coming out of the governor's office. Certainly there is some sway, but oftentimes it's up to commissioners who may very well not be subject matter experts and maybe don't really want to know or just don't have time to know. So I think that that's challenging. I also think learning pathways of sort of power and decision making is really important to getting stuff done. I remember taking a really great organizational theory class out of the D school, and we read Bowman and Deal, and they offer different frameworks for organizational structures. And I think they were 4 or 5, and some were based on organizations that see humans as family members, and it's the human resources mindset. But in policy, it's the political framework, and it's about power. And so I think one thing that's frustrating or difficult in getting good ideas moving forward is that there are certain people who are making decisions who are harder to find. They're the ones in the back room who have influence, and figuring out who the right players are to bring things to. It's not always obvious, right? And so I think navigating that, you have to have some sort of like intuitive instincts about how to like connect with people. And then you also have to learn how to make your research pitches, your best practices pitches in ways that are going to resonate with people and make them feel like, oh yeah, that's easy enough or doable.
That's great. Zach, what about on your side on the community college level? How would you describe the tensions in that work, or what are the force fields that you're sort of operating against or around?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we, in my particular position, it's great because we get the funding, right? We have the money, and especially for, at my particular college, enrollment is down, and so revenue is down. And here we are with, a fund that the state has maintained at the same level, luckily for us, in a context in which, revenue is down. So that's a positive, but, within a community college context, as an administrator over these funds, I can't really tell that many people what to do. And so a lot of what our office does is we bring in new ideas and we kind of dangle them out there, and we have to see who's willing to bite right? We have a meeting later this week where we're going to be presenting this idea of micro internships to faculty. So this is kind of along the lines of, you know, more. I think there's more work being embedded in education, and there's more education being embedded in work. And on the work being embedded in education piece, this is one of the things that we're trying to do, to integrate like tiny little internships for students who maybe they're already working and they don't have time for a full-on internship, but you know, that culminating project in their marketing class, why have it be a hypothetical when we can connect them to a local employer who actually wants a social media campaign, and they can do it that way, right? So we have this idea that we think is good, but we can't just say, hey, marketing instructor, integrate this now, please. We have to find people within the faculty community who are excited about this and who want to integrate it into what they're doing. And so that's one of the things that we spend a lot of our time doing is finding these great ideas and then finding faculty partners who want to champion them and bringing them together and funding the work. But oftentimes we're not the drivers. And I think it's, in the long run, I think it's for the best, but it does mean a little bit more upfront work on our part. So that's one of the challenges that we have to think about. And I mean, I could go all day about the challenges, but that's just one for fun.
Right. I'm glad you brought that one up, because I think for me too, like in K-12, it feels like that cultural piece. Well, there's a couple aspects to what you said that resonated. One is like building that like culture where it's not just you have the idea and then somebody else does the implementation in some sort of automatic mechanical way, that it's definitely, there's a cultural piece where there has to be enough trust. So and maybe culture of curiosity and trust, so that you can say, you know, who might be interested in this, and you're making that, you become skilled in making offers and pitches, as Maria was saying, like you're pitching, you're finding it, and you're staying curious about how the pitching can be effective. Both of you are, you know, saying similar things there, I think. You know, and that's an important part of any innovation, is like that offer stage, and learning from it. And I certainly think that internal school culture plays such a huge role to it, you know, in K-12 for making innovations last. Although I have to say, like, for me, like when I thought about the tensions, I think like a couple rungs down on the Maslowian hierarchy is just like school stability. Like there was the school I talked about in Oakland, where we had all this great work happening in CTE. You know, after a few years of growing the work, the school went through rapid fire administrative changes and then which led to pretty drastic like staff changes as well, because there are a lot of people got frustrated by the lack of direction, the new direction, whatever. And so I can't point to the program there anymore. It's not a thing. It's more of a memory among the alumni of the school, you know, and of the faculty alumni and admin alumni and so on. But so I think for K-12 work, just the longevity of admin, superintendents, who you name it, right, down the road, or in some urban schools too, like just teaching staff, right? So like building that, because if you're constantly replacing faculty, then you're constantly trying to rebuild a culture, I think, which is so foundational.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that finding the right champions, right, is so critical. And when you do have that turnover, right, you lose those folks. And the success of moving policy forward and making change within an institution is all about the right champions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mark, can we answer some of the questions?
Yeah, you could. We don't have to wait to. Yeah, I saw them. Some were coming in with your name attached. So yeah, you can hop in there.
Yeah, so Julie's asking, how will the duration and scope of a micro internship compare with a regular internship? So, I think when I think of an internship, I think maybe the whole summer, one semester or something like that. These are a little bit shorter. And what I like about them is it's not duplicative. So it's not like you're taking a full load of classes and then on top of that, you're doing an internship, but instead it's incorporated into the assignments of an existing course that you're already taking, which I think makes it a little bit easier for those who, have a lot of other obligations. So a micro internship could be, the way that we're thinking about it is, there could be, maybe you're in our visual media, one of our visual media classes. And so as part of your, finishing that class, you have to do some kind of a big project where you show off some like piece of work. And in the past, maybe that was for a hypothetical company that you make up, right? And what we would like to do is give students the opportunity to actually design something for a real company. So they get the experience of, interacting with someone who is going to give them feedback about what they want and what they don't want. And they get, a connection within an industry, and they just have that real experience, but it's condensed into a single project for one class. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And then in terms, Leslie's asking, what do you mean by embedding work in education versus embedding education in work? So, on one side of that, right, we're trying to bring in as much real work into our education as possible, because I think that's one of the best ways that people learn. So whether that's through these micro internships or real internships or apprenticeships, we want kind of a wide variety of ways for students to touch real work and kind of ease themselves into that transition. So it's not just going from all classes to all work, right? But there's a little bit more integration there, and they're getting real world skills. Even if it's just something as simple as, let's go and tour Salesforce and talk to some of the, people that work there, right? And then on the flip side of that, what we're hearing a lot from employers is, they're concerned. There's lots of retirements happening. They're concerned about retaining a skilled workforce, and so they're asking for a lot of training from us to deliver to their existing employees. And interestingly, some of that it can be technical, right? Like, oh, I got to get my staff familiar with this new, accounting software or something like that, and we can teach that. But a lot of what we're hearing, like I was speaking with one of our local hospitals recently, and what they're asking for is, they hire a bunch of our students to be everything from janitors to clerks to, phlebotomists who draw blood. And one thing that they want a lot of those different employees to learn, the thing that maybe they all have in common is like cultural competency. So they're asking for, a class on working with the LGBTQ community. And so their employers want more education embedded in the work. And we're also trying to embed more work in education. And so I think there's a little bit of a blurring of the lines there, which I think I think that's a good thing in terms of kind of helping our students develop the skills that they need.
And I'll just say, and I dropped in the chat a link to Registered Apprenticeship Program. It's a federal program. They give money to states, and significant dollars are flowing through to expand this program. It's been around forever, but it's now beginning to gain traction, and it's a great example of combining work and education. And community colleges are really key players in a lot of the RAs.
That's terrific. I wanted to take another stab at another question I saw come in, which is from a middle school math teacher. Props to you for that work. It's such important work, and there's a whole lot of things that come to mind for why math, and because we know that in middle school a lot of times is when you first start hearing that sort of, why do I even have to know this? Why do I have to learn that? And often it's not infrequently correlated with sort of that moment of turning academic identity wise, right? And I think there's a lot. The things that come to my mind off the top of my head, and you may already be doing a bunch of this, but Joe Bowler at Stanford as a math education professor has done a lot to look at mathematical mindset and to really celebrating student questions and looking at sort of the beauty of the process of math rather than the product and rather than the speed of, being correct. And so by the time you get a student, if you're a 7th grade math teacher, you may have had a student who's already had, a number of years of discouraging experiences in math because they're not maybe they weren't the fastest person or and there already is a sense in these classrooms maybe about what a math person looks like. And so, so Joe Bowler's work on ucube.org and on her own website now, really helps to combat that. She's not alone in this at Stanford. The Jenny Langer-Osuna also, and a bunch of others have done great work on math and identity. And so I would certainly say go for all of that. There's and any other resource. There was a minute ago looking over on my bookshelf because there's a book, a mathematician who came out with a book just about the beauty of math. And I was trying to find the spine so I could write the title in the chat, but I can't find it. So I'll look for it. But it's that kind of thing, I think. It's like, and then the one is there is utility, right? In terms of career utility, it's not, I wouldn't start there, but there's lots of different ways to show people who are using math in their careers. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, code.org had a big video about people who are programmers, and it was just, you got to see them in their fun Silicon Valley offices, with all the accoutrements. And anyway, so like math can take you places is another way to attack it. But I think the shorter term is it's just really beautiful, and their student questions in math and are worthwhile. It makes you think. It's one other way to beauty, but yeah, and I think then just seeing yourself as a mathematician, all anything you can do to see, in math class, and you suggested this could be asked analogously in other areas, as seeing yourself as a scientist, as a mathematician, as a historian, as you're coming through elementary, middle, high school. I think that's how some of that is how you build resilient academic identities. Oh, and then the last thing is not ever letting students think they have to be one or the other. And I think the New World work is more amenable to this. But I mean, even my own kids and some of the better schools in the Bay Area had very explicit messages like, don't worry if you're not good at math, which was a lie, by the way, because you're so creative, right? As if those things had to be opposed. They're not, right? You can be two things. This is 2022. You could be more than two things. So that's
you really have to be these days. You kind of have to. I mean, I think another trend is, right, everything's much more interdisciplinary now, and will be even more so going forward. And you really can't get away from not being able to write or not being able to do kind of some basic mathematical thinking, even if the calculations are being done for you. So yeah.
I feel like there was another question in here. Leslie Perzak, right, about the difference between embedding work in education and education in work? Did you?
He answered that for me.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Perfect, yeah.
And there's a question about the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee, and I'm going to look to our Californians to see if they know about that.
I've heard of it. I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure what they're up to. I know it's some kind of like system alignment work, but I'm not exactly sure how that's like manifested itself. If there's an interest in discussing kind of like system alignment in general in California, we could definitely talk about that, because we have I have the Strong Workforce program funding, and then there's analogous or parallel K-12 strong workforce program funding. So there's some, funding alignment there, but I'm not exactly sure what they're working on in the background.
Can I just comment on that? So yes, so the reason and my disappointment that you aren't as aware of it as it is, as you all have mentioned, we have such a disparate system and we are not aligned. So Zachary, I appreciate your attempt to at least you have a sense that this committee, it's made up of 3 members of the California State Board of Education and 3 members from the community college governors, and it is about trying to align the systems. I was on the State Board of Education and I actually chaired this committee for a number of years, trying to get our message out and our work out to the K-12 and the community college systems. And we have been only somewhat successful from your responses to that. But we do have quality standards that were developed around workforce pathways. And so the hope was that as we are developing these pathways and as we are thinking about ways that students transition from K-12 into community colleges, that there would be a better sense of alignment. And as you say, there's a lot of bureaucracy around both systems that have been barriers, but this is a place that has started. And what is also nice is that, as you mentioned, Zachary, the Strong Workforce Program and the CTIG program that's in K-12, that committee does oversee the standards that go into both of those programs. So hopefully we will see a little bit more. And then I think the other piece of looking at future of work in that we have not attended to is that post-pandemic, each of these workforce pathways have standards for how for that particular industry. But I think we now need to relook at these standards and see how those industries post-pandemic, what those standards might look like because of the remote work, or it could be other types of areas that we are seeing. So I think we really need to keep an eye out for the future work, given the context has changed so much after COVID-19.
I'd love to respond if I may. Ting, I'm so glad you brought that up, and thanks for your work on this advisory committee. It's so important. When I was at Stanford, we read a lot by Michael Kirst, who I think was away for a semester that I wanted to take his course. But, he talks so much about connecting those disparate systems. I think is an incredible leader in California and a thought leader nationally. And just dropping in the chat here, one of his blogs about a project I worked on. I was at the Education Commission of the States as a policy analyst for a while and worked on this blueprint for college readiness. And it was looking at 10 key state policies across the country that were designed to connect those disparate systems so kids aren't falling through the cracks. The blueprint for college readiness could use some updating, but as I told Mark and Zach earlier, the really big takeaway is there's huge variation in states' connectedness, that it varies so much. And California is, of course, a real leader thanks to people like you and Zach and Mark and Michael Kirst and Stanford,
And actually, it's Michael Kirst's idea to form this committee.
No doubt. There were a number of people who impacted me greatly in my career, and he's absolutely one of them, and I'm so grateful.
Wonderful. He's just wonderful.
Yeah,
that's terrific. Well, on this subject of like the infrastructure, the giant sort of bureaucracy of education and its disparate parts, like how I wanted to just, before we open it up to more questions, ask you both, Zach and Maria, what you think about sort of where the future wants us to go and like how we can steer these big bureaucracies. Like how nimble are we able to be, as we're responding to new industry opportunity, for CTE or just really urgent societal things like climate change, for instance, and how we think through policy and educational impacts there and opportunities there. and then just, as Ting was saying, and as we've hinted at, that the other facets of this future of work, as it becomes hopefully more humane and more open to remoteness, more acknowledging of people having simultaneous or more varied career paths in their long careers. What do you think about how ready is our system to be nimble for these changes, and where? Yeah.
Zach, maybe I'll start with the big picture, and then you can tell us what that's like on the institutional level. And, Mark, my first thought is follow the money, right? So the workforce development system is really complicated because the federal Department of Labor funnels money to states through lots of different channels. And then there's so many reporting requirements. So for example, our state workforce development board spends a lot of their time writing reports and trying to comply with the feds to then pass through money. And so some states have very successful workforce boards, but some really struggle because they're dealing with this complicated funding structure. And, I think we're at an incredible moment in time. This is an historic moment of incredible investment in workforce development, in education. However, my caveat is that there are incredible rules and regulations and boundaries around that money, limiting states' abilities to get creative. Now, institutions are getting their own money directly from the feds and from ARPA and some in the CARES Act. And then public institutions are also getting money from states. But the states have real limits, and we've experienced that a lot of trying to put forward project plans and to have the feds say, well, that's not related enough to what we're trying to fund. So I think following the money and also just recognizing like this is an incredible moment. And so for those of you working in the policy space and in the education field, I think this is really exciting.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, and it should say that it is just my perspective, I'm not representing the college in this discussion, but, I think we're so, the system is, as we've already said, so kind of fractured and siloed. Some people will get there and some won't. Within an institution, some departments will get there sooner than others. And, some offices will get there sooner than others. I mean, it really is. We are, as CCSF, right, we're kind of in our own silo. And then within our system, right, then there's other silos within that. So the pace of change, the world is changing pretty fast, and some departments will keep up with that and some won't. And it's kind of our job to give everyone that opportunity and the resources they need to kind of update themselves, right? But there are some the types of changes that we're asking different students to make vary by their discipline. And so, some departments have farther to go than others just because the rate of change in their areas is so much faster. So, we're at a really critical moment here. And, I think just the way that the American system is designed, some of my departments, right, are going to get there faster than others. Some states are going to get there faster than others. And we just have such a balkanized system. I think it's really gonna vary. And the unfortunate thing is that, whenever there's variation, the people without privilege are going to be the ones that get there last. So, it's as a community college that kind of serve more of that population, right? The pressure is really on us to prepare our students. I think in the past, right, you could get a great job, you could get a great union job, just like pulling pulling bones out of chickens over and over and over again, or drilling a screw into the door of a car, right, over and over and over again. And that kind of allowed us to hide, right? So if we weren't good at teaching people how to be creative or how to do these other things, right, they could still get decent jobs doing these things. But those jobs where we treat people like robots, those are being done now by robots. So we don't have anywhere to hide anymore. And we really need to make sure that we're giving everybody these skills. And you know, I hope we'll meet that challenge, but it is a tough challenge for sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of, Samuel has just lobbed in a couple of really rich questions back to back, and so I think it is time probably to start moving into answering some of these questions. I love these, and I hope we can make time for, and then Leslie too also. So let's see if we can make time. The first one is about this commonly cited thing on TED Talks and otherwise you hear, you know, most of the jobs of the future haven't even been created yet. What do we think about that? And then to the extent to which it's true, how do we make change in our institutions to support, you know, to help students grow into those jobs of the future, right? And then, yeah, well, why don't we take that one first?
Yeah, I think for us, yeah, I have no idea what those will be, right? Nobody does. So for us, our goal is not to kind of try and predict the future, but rather to make sure that our students are prepared and flexible and adaptable so that when that future starts to materialize, they can be kind of active. You know, they can have a role in actively shaping that future instead of just kind of being passive recipients. So a lot of it is just making sure, I mean, you know, a lot of our students and our faculty will say, right, like, well, I don't teach like these soft skills, right? I'm teaching people how to, you know, fix an HVAC system or something like that. Or a student will say, I don't want to learn how to write and present an argument. I just want to learn how to do X, Y, Z. And so for us, I think we're just focusing on giving students the tools and embedding those kind of soft skills in all of our courses to make sure that whatever the future ends up being, they're a little bit more prepared for it, since I think it is pretty difficult to predict any particular skill, and even harder to train on it if it doesn't, you know, if it's not widely adopted or even invented yet. So,
Maria, you got called out a little bit in that question, right? It's like, do we have to wait for the money? Is part of the question.
No, and not on the programmatic level and not on the sort of educator student level. I think experiential learning is really important, experiential learning cycle for students to learn the skills, but then also be able to reflect on those skills and connect those skills to other things. I think Zach's point about soft skills are really important, and we know that employers now are really looking for people who can work as a team, who are creative, who can show up to work on time, you know, depending on the field, like what the different challenges are with employees. So I think that those practitioners have a lot of power and a lot of influence to affect change.
Great. I have a lot of thoughts on that one, but I'm wanting to get time for Samuel's second question, which is about the future of the teaching profession. And part of my response is just to echo, yes, that's a real thing. And I think there is not only, I think there's a couple of big issues that have only gotten worse during COVID and beyond. One is literally just a respect issue in like society, and part of that is a structural respect or disrespect. And part of what I mean by structural disrespect is the fact that still in 2022, you can be a teacher certified in New Jersey, and then you move 2 years later to Pennsylvania, 5 miles away, and they say, sorry, you can't teach here. You have to be certified here. And likewise, your pension is stuck. If you've built up a pension at all, it's stuck also in your old state, right? And those two things to me make absolutely no sense, right? And they're somehow are whatever. Maybe we're somehow we're so attached to the idea of local control that we have to, say we don't have great ambitions as a, on a societal level to, to improve the position of teachers in our society. So I think teachers are doing an amazing work. And I think that part of it is on like addressing these bigger structural disrespect issues. Yeah. There was that time early in COVID, right, where the public sentiment said, oh my gosh, we realize how undervalued teachers are. Let's pay them all $1 million a year, right? And that has kind of gone away as kids have come back to school.
Just to sort of speak to early educators who are the worst paid, there's now a movement to do supplemental wages. And so states are actually pitching in money so that early educators can make a livable wage barely.
Yeah, these are great questions. Leslie asks, how do we prepare all students, or quote unquote ordinary students in community college, to succeed in more privileged institutions? Interesting.
I think, that's a lot of what my career services team does. So they do, employer engagement and stuff like that. But really what they're doing is trying to fill in the kind of social and cultural capital gaps that some of our students have. So I don't know necessarily that a lot of our students are going on to more privileged institutions, but we want them to be able in general to function in more privileged spaces and to get access to those spaces in the first place. So a lot of what they're doing is, even kind of introducing people to their network, right? It's like, some of us might be able to get an introduction through, our parents or something like that, or through our school. And maybe some of our students, many of whom are immigrants or, the first generation to go to college in their family, right? They might not have those connections. So that's kind of where our career services team fills in. They do things like just, they just tell you about the industry, right? Again, you could learn that if you had the right social or cultural capital, but many of our students don't. Mock interviews, all sorts of kind of like those services just go to helping students make up some of the differences or make up some of the gaps. So that's some of what we're doing.
If I could jump in on that, because I love that question. I think it's a lot of the responsibility of the receiving privileged institution. And there's some examples out there. So I'm an alum of Amherst College, for example, which has the highest community college transfer rate of sort of the elite institutions. And there's so many things that institution has a responsibility to do. So mentoring, wraparound services. They also provide funding to those students on top of tuition to allow them to fly home on spring break or to allow them to buy school clothes so that they're not feeling so isolated, and as well as sort of bringing groups of students together from the transfer, who transfer to take them out for dinner and let them meet each other. So, I think community colleges, folks like Zach, are doing amazing work, and that's important, but man, those schools with the privilege and the money have a huge responsibility, and it's in their best interest because those ordinary students add so much value, richness, culture to the school community, the student body. I'll just offer, so I went to Stanford 14 years ago, but man, I'm still so struck and influenced by the great thinkers there. And I took a course, I actually I was in the higher ed track, but I took a course with Anthony Antonio, who I believe is still teaching there. And he was very committed. He is very committed to sort of questioning privilege and cultural habitus, as Pierre Bourdieu calls it, and really thinking about obligations and responsibilities of the elite institutions to support lower income students.
That's terrific. It's been my experience too, that there's so many good people still on campus, and especially in the RILE program, who help to think through these really interesting tensions around privilege. And yeah, that's super helpful. Well, I want to thank everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Ihan in a second, but I want to thank everyone for participating, for your amazing questions. And I think it's moments like this, education is widely fractured and is sometimes we get isolated and a little discouraged in our own corners. And it's opportunities like this that lets the ecosystem reconnect across these wide gulfs that really help us stay encouraged and help us, stay connected to the knowledge that we need to remain nimble and flexible and inspire us personally in our own pathway, because our own pathways aren't over yet.